You think you would love to be royalty. You imagine the gowns, the palaces, the jewels that could buy a small country. You picture servants attending to your every need and diplomats bowing when you enter a room. And if someone told you that you could wake up tomorrow as the Empress of Russia, the most glamorous and feared royal title on the planet at the turn of the 20th century, you would probably say yes without thinking twice. But here is what you are not picturing. You are not picturing the woman who actually held that title in 1900, lying awake at 3 in the morning in a palace so large she could scream and nobody would hear her legs burning with nerve pain, her heart beating in a rhythm her doctors could not explain, knowing that when the sun came up, she would have to face a court that despised her, a mother-in-law who refused to acknowledge her rank, and an entire nation whispering that she was a failure because she had not yet given birth to a son. That woman was Empress Alexandra Feodorovna, born Princess Alex of Hesse-Darmstadt, granddaughter of Queen Victoria, wife of Tsar Nicholas II. On paper, she had everything. In reality, her life was so relentlessly miserable that you would not make it through a single day of it. To understand just how bad it was, you need to start where her day started. And that means the bedroom of the Alexander Palace at Tsarskoye Selo, about 15 miles south of St. Petersburg. Alexandra and Nicholas had married in November of 1894, just weeks after Nicholas's father, Tsar Alexander III, died. The old Tsar had resisted the match for years. He did not fully accept Alexandra as his future daughter-in-law until he was literally on his deathbed. He gave his blessing while wearing his full military uniform, insisted on doing it properly even as he was dying, and then he was gone. So Alexandra arrived in Russia for her wedding during a funeral. The court joked darkly that she had come to them behind a coffin. It was a terrible omen, and she felt it. Within months, she and Nicholas had moved out of the Winter Palace entirely, retreating to the Alexander Palace at Tsarskoye Selo. The official reason was that they found St. Petersburg too modern, too noisy, too much. The real reason was that Alexandra could not stand being around the Russian court, and the Russian court could not stand being around her. So they withdrew to this smaller palace in the countryside, and already, before she had been empress for even a year, she was isolating herself from the people she was supposed to lead. Her mornings began early, and they began in pain. Alexandra suffered from severe sciatica that had started during her pregnancies and would stay with her for the rest of her life. Some days it was manageable, a dull ache she could push through. Other days it was so bad she could barely stand, and servants had to wheel her through the palace corridors in a chair. Nicholas wrote about it constantly in his diary, entry after entry noting that Alex was unwell again, that her legs were troubling her, that she had spent another day lying down. During some of her pregnancies, she had been bedridden for months at a stretch, spending 7 weeks flat on her back at one point, unable to do anything but wait for the pain to pass. On top of the sciatica, she likely suffered from a thyroid condition, possibly Graves' disease, which left her exhausted, swollen, unable to sleep properly, and plagued by an irregular heartbeat. She complained of fatigue that never lifted, of feet so swollen she could barely fit them into shoes, of insomnia that kept her staring at the ceiling until dawn. She ate little but never lost weight. She had become a vegetarian, though whether that was by choice or because her body simply refused heavier food is not entirely clear. She took an herbal medicine called Adonis vernalis just to keep her pulse from racing out of control. Later in life, she would become dependent on Veronal, a sedative, and she once confessed to a friend that she was, in her own words, literally saturated with it. But in 1900, she was only 28 years old, and she was already falling apart. Now imagine dragging yourself out of bed feeling like that, and then facing the dressing ritual. Alexandra had 6 personal dressers on staff. The chief dresser was an Italian woman named Madeline Zanotti, whose family had served the House of Hesse for generations. The second in command was a Baltic woman named Louise Teutelberg, and there were 4 others. They rotated in shifts of 3 days each. But here is the detail that tells you everything about who Alexandra was as a person. None of these 6 women, not a single one, ever saw the Empress undressed or in her bath. She got up alone. went to her bath alone, put on her undergarments alone, and only called for the dressers once she was wrapped in a silk kimono and ready to have her hair arranged. This was Victorian modesty taken to an extreme, inherited directly from her grandmother, Queen Victoria, and Alexandra clung to it like armor. The bedroom, the lingerie, the sleeping quarters, all of it had to be plain, modest, almost severe, nothing filmy, nothing theatrical. This was a woman who carried Windsor Castle in her bones even while living in a Russian palace, and the children were raised the same way. Her daughters slept on hard camp cots with no pillows. They made their own beds every morning. They took cold baths, just as their father had done when he was a boy. In a palace filled with gold and silk and priceless art, the imperial children lived like they were at a military boarding school. That was Alexandra's doing. She believed in discipline, in self-denial, in the idea that luxury made people soft. You have to wonder what the Russian aristocrats thought when they heard about this, because the aristocrats of St. Petersburg were not exactly known for their restraint, but the morning routine was the easy part. The real suffering started the moment Alexandra had to deal with other people. And the first person she had to deal with, day after day, year after year, was her mother-in-law. Dowager Empress Maria Feodorovna was everything Alexandra was not. She was charming, sociable, beloved by the court, and she spoke flawless French, which was the language of Russian high society. Maria had been the darling of St. Petersburg for decades, and when her husband, Alexander III, died in 1894, she had no intention of stepping aside for some shy, awkward, German-born princess who could barely hold a conversation at a dinner party. The power struggle between these two women defined Alexandra's early years as empress, and Maria won almost every round. The most humiliating example was the crown jewels. When a new empress took the throne, the previous empress was expected to hand over the imperial jewels. It was tradition, it was protocol. Maria refused. Encouraged by her sister, the Princess of Wales, Maria held on to the crown jewels and would not give them up. When Nicholas finally pressured his mother into turning over a few pieces, Maria chose the heaviest, most old-fashioned items she could find, pieces that were too clunky and uncomfortable to actually wear. It was a calculated insult, and everyone at court knew it, but it got worse. Under Russian court etiquette, the Dowager Empress outranked the reigning empress. That was not Maria being difficult. That was actual protocol, baked into centuries of Russian tradition. And Maria made sure everyone followed it. She insisted on this precedence at every state occasion, walking ahead of Alexandra, sitting in the more prominent position, receiving guests first. At formal dinners, Maria was seated closer to the head of the table. At receptions, Maria greeted the dignitaries, while Alexandra waited. At the theater, Maria occupied the better box. So picture this. You are the Empress of Russia. Your husband rules 1/6 of the Earth's surface, over 130 million people. And at every formal event, your mother-in-law walks in front of you, and everyone treats her like she is the real queen. That is what Alexandra lived with year after year. The ladies in waiting, the courtiers, the visiting ambassadors, they all gravitated toward Maria because Maria was fun. Maria danced. Maria charmed. Maria remembered names and told jokes in perfect French. Alexandra stood in corners and looked miserable, and people drew their own conclusions. And the court did not help. They sided with Maria almost universally because they had never liked Alexandra in the first place. The reasons were stacked against her from the beginning. She was German, and Russia had a complicated relationship with Germany. She spoke English as her primary language, since she had been raised largely by English nannies at the direction of Queen Victoria. Her Russian was functional but accented, and her French, the language every aristocrat in St. Petersburg used for daily conversation, was genuinely poor. In a court where social fluency meant everything, Alexandra was essentially mute. She could not engage in the rapid, witty, gossip-filled conversations that fueled Russian high society. She came across as stiff, cold, disapproving. The court called her aloof. What they meant was that she was terrified. Because here is what nobody at those parties understood. Alexandra was not cold. She was paralyzingly shy. She had been that way since childhood, since the winter of 1878, when diphtheria swept through her family's palace in Darmstadt. The disease tore through the household like a fire. Most of the children fell ill, along with their father, Grand Duke Louis. Alexandra's mother, Princess Alice, refused to leave their bedsides and nursed nearly all of them back to health. But her devotion cost her everything. In December of that year, Alice caught the disease herself and died. Alexandra's beloved younger sister Marie died too. Alexandra was 6 years old. Before that double loss, her family had called her Sunny because she was so cheerful and outgoing. The nickname fit perfectly. After the deaths, the light went out. She turned inward, became serious, guarded, and she never fully came back. Queen Victoria essentially raised her after that, taking the traumatized child under her wing at Balmoral and the Isle of Wight. The atmosphere at her grandmother's side was, by all accounts, strained and severe. Alexandra learned to be serious. She learned to rely on her inner life for strength. She did not learn how to make small talk at a party. So the woman the Russian court dismissed as cold and arrogant was actually a grieving child who never learned how to be warm in public. And now that grieving child was expected to host balls for 1,000 people in a palace with nearly 2,000 rooms. The social obligations alone would crush you. The Russian court season ran through the winter months, and during that time, the Empress was expected to attend and often host a relentless calendar of balls, receptions, dinners, and formal audiences. The Winter Palace, where many of these events still took place even after the family moved to Tsarskoye Selo, had over 1,500 rooms, nearly 2,000 windows, and 117 staircases. The great ball that opened each season was held in the Nikolaevsky Hall, and an invitation to court was not a suggestion. It was a command. Etiquette demanded that a court invitation take precedence over every other engagement, even mourning for the dead. If you received one, you showed up. For women, the requirements were suffocating. Court dress regulations dictated exactly what you wore, down to the style of the train, the placement of the jewels, and the cut of the sleeves. These gowns were enormously heavy. At the famous costume ball of 1903, one of the few balls Alexandra is known to have actively participated in planning, she dressed as a 17th century Tsarina in a gown covered with emeralds. Her earrings were so heavy she could barely hold her head up. And that was supposed to be a fun evening. That was the celebration. Every other ball was pure obligation. And it was not just balls. Alexandra's afternoons were consumed by formal audiences, charity visits, and the endless administrative obligations of being empress. One of her ladies-in-waiting noted that Alexandra's life was made up of long and busy days, that most of her afternoons were spent giving audiences, going to schools, or seeing people about her various charities. She did care about charitable work. She set up schools for nurses and housemaids. She visited hospitals. She wanted to open a workhouse for the very poor. But the social parts of these duties drained her completely. Alexandra handled the court events the way you would expect a shy, chronically ill woman to handle them. She minimized contact. She gave audiences one person at a time instead of in groups because she felt less anxious that way. She removed the names of people she considered scandalous from guest lists, which infuriated the aristocracy. She arrived late, left early, and spent as much time as possible in side rooms away from the crowd. The court noticed all of it. They did not interpret it as shyness or illness. They interpreted it as contempt. And hovering over every single day, every social event, every whispered conversation, in every gilded hallway, was one question that would not go away. Where is the heir? By 1900, Alexandra had given birth to 3 daughters: Olga in 1895, Tatiana in 1897, and Marie in 1899. A 4th daughter, Anastasia, would arrive in 1901. Russian succession law was absolute on this point. Women could not inherit the throne. The Empress's single most important job, the one duty that mattered above everything else, above charm, above health, above personal happiness, was to produce a male heir. And she kept having girls. You cannot overstate what this did to her. Every pregnancy carried the weight of an empire. Every delivery room was a verdict. And every time the announcement came that the child was a daughter, Alexandra felt the disappointment of an entire nation land on her shoulders. This was not some abstract cultural expectation. This was a political crisis that got worse with every birth. Pamphlets circulated in the capital reminding the public, and by extension reminding her, that a queen who does not produce a son is merely a foreigner in the state, and a very dangerous foreigner at that. Those were not idle words. That was the political reality. The Romanov dynasty needed a male heir to survive. Without one, the succession was uncertain, the dynasty was vulnerable, and Alexandra was the one person everyone blamed. She was tolerated, not embraced, useful only so long as she might still deliver the boy everyone was waiting for. The whispers followed her everywhere. At church, at dinner, in the hallways of the palace, where servants talked when they thought nobody was listening. She heard all of it. Or if she did not hear it, she felt it, which was worse. The pressure was made worse by the fact that her own health suffered with each pregnancy. The sciatica intensified every time. She spent weeks bedridden before each delivery, sometimes months. The emotional toll was staggering. Each time she went into labor, the entire court waited. Ministers waited. The country waited. And each time the word came back that it was another girl, the silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. By the time Anastasia was born in 1901, Alexandra was visibly worn down. She was 29 years old and looked older. People who had known her before the marriage barely recognized her. The bright, pretty girl who had once been Queen Victoria's favorite granddaughter, the young princess who had caught the eye of the handsome Russian heir at the age of 12 and fallen in love with him against the wishes of both their families, that girl was disappearing behind layers of anxiety, illness, and disappointment. In her place was a woman who spent more and more of her time on a chaise longue, rarely seen in public, complaining of symptoms that the doctors could treat but never cure. And she carried something else too, something she could not tell anyone about. Alexandra knew there was a chance, a real chance, that she carried the gene for hemophilia. Her grandmother, Queen Victoria, had passed it through the bloodlines of half the royal houses of Europe. Alexandra's own brother, Friedrich, had bled to death at the age of 2 after falling from a window. Her uncle, Prince Leopold, had died from the disease as well. The pattern was clear. Women carried the gene. Their sons suffered from it. If Alexandra ever did have a boy, that boy might inherit a condition that meant the smallest bruise could become prolonged internal bleeding, that a bump on the knee could leave him screaming in pain for days, that a simple cut could kill him. She lived with that knowledge every single day, and she could not share it with the court, could not explain why the prospect of finally having a boy terrified her almost as much as not having one. When Alexei was eventually born in 1904, her worst fear came true. He had hemophilia, and his symptoms appeared before he was even a year old. But in 1900, that was still 4 years away, and she was already breaking. There was one more weight that Alexandra carried from her very first days as Empress, and it was the kind of thing that does not wash off. In May of 1896, just days after her coronation alongside Nicholas in Moscow, a public festival was held at Khodynka field on the outskirts of the city. It was supposed to be a celebration, one of the biggest parties in Russian history. The new Tsar had invited all of Russia to share in his joy, and organizers set up 150 stalls to distribute free gifts to the people. Each person was promised a loaf of bread, a sausage, some gingerbread, a bag of sweets and nuts, and a commemorative enamel cup stamped with the initials of Nicholas and Alexandra. That cup would later be known as the Cup of Sorrows. Over 500,000 people showed up before dawn, camping out on the field overnight, waiting for the stalls to open. The field itself was actually a military training ground, and it was riddled with ditches, trenches, and gullies left over from army exercises. Nobody had bothered to fill them in. When rumors spread through the crowd that there were not enough gifts for everyone, and that the cups might contain a gold coin, panic broke out. The crowd surged forward. People fell into the trenches and could not get out. Others were trampled by the sheer weight of bodies pressing forward. In the space of minutes, Khodynka Field looked like a battlefield. Over 1,300 people were crushed or suffocated to death, and thousands more were injured. Nicholas and Alexandra found out that morning. They were devastated. But the schedule continued. That evening, the new Tsar and Tsarina attended a ball at the French embassy, a decision that would follow them for the rest of their lives. The public was furious. Newspapers called Nicholas Bloody Nicholas. And Alexandra, the foreign-born empress who had already failed to win the love of the court, was now associated with a tragedy that killed over 1,000 ordinary Russians on what should have been the happiest day of her reign. She had been empress for less than 2 years, and she was already haunted. So when you put all of this together and try to imagine yourself waking up as Empress Alexandra on any given morning in 1900, this is what your day looks like. You wake up in pain, in a palace you retreated to because you could not face the court. You dress yourself in private because you cannot bear to be vulnerable even around your own servants. You take medicine to keep your heart from racing. You face a mother-in-law who refuses to give you the crown jewels and outranks you at every public event. You try to navigate a court that speaks a language you struggle with, that sees your shyness as arrogance, that blames you for not producing a son. You attend functions where your earrings are so heavy they cut into your skin, where every conversation is a test you are failing, where every smile in your direction might be hiding contempt. You carry the knowledge that if you do have a son, he might have a disease that could kill him. And underneath all of it, 1,300 people died on a field at your coronation, and the country has not forgotten. That is a Tuesday. That is not a crisis day. There is no revolution at the gates, no assassination attempt, no war declaration sitting on a desk somewhere. That is just the ordinary, grinding, soul-crushing reality of being Empress Alexandra in the year 1900. The gowns weigh 10 pounds. The jewels give you headaches. The palace has 2,000 windows and not a single person in it who feels like a friend. Your husband loves you, truly loves you, and that is the one good thing. But he is also the autocratic ruler of 130 million people, and his attention is divided in 100 directions. And when he is gone, you are alone in a way that most people will never understand. And here is the part that makes it truly unbearable. It does not get better. Not in 1901, when Anastasia is born and the heir still has not arrived. Not in 1904, when Alexei finally comes and brings hemophilia with him. Not in 1905, when revolution erupts across Russia. Not in 1914, when the world goes to war. The trajectory of Alexandra's life from this point forward is a long, slow descent, and she is already exhausted before the worst of it even begins. She will spend the next 17 years watching her son bleed, trusting a con man named Rasputin because he seems to be the only one who can help, alienating every remaining ally at court, and making political decisions during the war that will bring the entire Romanov dynasty crashing down. And it all ends in a basement in Yekaterinburg in 1918, with bullets and bayonets and diamonds sewn into the children's clothing in a final, desperate, useless attempt to protect them. But you did not know any of that in 1900. All you knew was that your legs hurt, and your heart was racing, and the Dowager Empress was wearing your jewels, and somewhere in St. Petersburg, 1,000 aristocrats were laughing at your French. You were 28 years old. You had 3 little girls you adored and a husband who wrote you love letters, and you were the most miserable woman in Russia. So no, you would not survive one day as Empress Alexandra, not because of the assassins or the revolutions that came later, but because the ordinary, everyday life of this woman was a kind of suffering that no palace, no title, and no amount of diamonds could fix. She was trapped in a role she was never built for, surrounded by people who never accepted her, carrying secrets she could never share, slowly being consumed by a body that was failing her and a court that had written her off before she ever had a chance. And she woke up every morning and did it anyway, for 23 years, until the morning she did not wake up at all. If this story got under your skin, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one. Drop a comment and tell me which historical figure you think had the hardest life behind the glamour.